From the southeastern corner of western North Carolina, this is Polk Lore. I'm your host, James Hernishin. And that's Shane Varndore doing what he does best, making sure that a dead ash tree in my front yard falls exactly where I need it to fall. As you'll hear, Shane's been a tree guy for pretty much his entire life. But he doesn't just saw them down, and it's not fair to reduce what he does for a living to just getting rid of inconvenient vegetation. I wouldn't have asked him to be part of Polk Lore if that was the case. Although he's not a particularly talkative type most of the time, we've known each other for quite a while, and I guess he's learned to trust me enough to sit down for an honest talk about trees, our relationship with them, and some of the things we're doing with them and to them that we probably shouldn't be doing. If this episode sounds a little different, that's on purpose. I set up my recording gear on some logs in his yard in Saluda on one of those gorgeous September mornings that reminds us all of why we live where we do. Our conversation was a little more free-ranging than what you might expect, but I think it holds together, largely because Shane has clearly been studying and thinking long and hard about what trees mean at both the ecological and community level. In fact, I'd have to say this one was one of the most enjoyable interviews I've conducted so far. I actually approached Shane about this more than a year ago. We had to keep putting it off for one reason or another. We both have day jobs and offspring, to name two. But like anything to do with trees and nature, patience is a virtue. And because trees are so essential to life in western North Carolina, I think you'll agree that it was worth the wait, even if I did get sap all over the back of my shirt. Shane Varndore, welcome to Polk Lore.
Thanks for having me.
I think this is a subject that a lot of people are going to be a little surprised that I'm getting into because, usually I'm talking about the political or cultural dimensions of this community, but trees, everyone's got a lot of experience with them, but how much do they know about really the role that trees play in everyone's life, right?
Right.
And not just people like yourself who deal with them on a daily basis.
Yeah, they are not really thought about or considered by the average person on an average day-to-day basis.
Even though they see them every day.
They see them. Their lives are full of them, from products to environment. We just tend to ride right by them.
So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came about to being a guy who takes care of trees.
Well, that's a good question. So I've been in Polk County my whole life. My mother's family comes from the Packlet Valley. We're part Cherokee on one side from right here, and descended from James Mills, the original Lord's proprietor, and just on down the line. They've been here a long time. I grew up in the Packlet Valley, and that means you grow up around trees. You either have the river or a mountainside with trees, and that's where I grew up. And so as you can imagine, I spent a lot of time climbing on trees and playing with sticks and throwing rocks and rolling logs down hills and all that sort of stuff. My uncle actually was in the tree business when I was young, and I remember watching him cut down a tree for the first time when I was about 7 years old. And it was a massive poplar tree, and it was just so exhilarating to me. It was just like the coolest thing ever to watch all that stuff break when it was falling, and the sounds and the chainsaw. So I got pretty interested in it at a young age. But my stepfather had arthritis that had crippled him. So at a young age, I wound up doing a lot of the chores and maintenance around the house. I think the first time I ran a chainsaw, I was about 9 years old. So it just kind of naturally developed. And then I went off to college and thought I was going to be a physicist, and realized that I didn't like being inside. So I got involved with the landscaping and forestry department there at Warren Wilson. And that's where I climbed my first tree sort of professionally with all the right gear instead of just being a hillbilly in the woods. And I was the only person in my class that could do it. So, I left college not too long after and came back to Saluda and started working with a fellow who built cabins, but also had a tree service. And we spent our time doing that and running around the country chasing hurricanes. And one thing led to the other, and eventually I had to start my own business. So that's how I got where I'm at.
How long have you been running Varndore's tree service?
Well, I've been self-employed for 18 years now. But we just went under the name Varndore's Tree Service about 5 years back. I was Sustained Creation before that, but it was just too much to try to make furniture and deal with lumber and cut trees and build houses. You know, it was too much. So I went to where the decent money was.
The reason I'm doing any of these podcasts is there's a subject I think people don't know that much about. I certainly don't know that much about. So I'm going to ask you, what is it about our relationship with trees and forests that people don't understand that they probably should?
They're actually pretty fragile. I mean, we're pretty darn abusive when it comes to our trees, especially in our yard. But, you know, we're also dealing with an environment around here where the land was stripped and robbed of timber for several generations. I mean, everything you see around here has been logged 2 times, if not 3 or more. And we really don't have a forest anymore. You know, we have woods. And we have lots of native trees. We have lots of invasives, and the ecosystem just isn't what it originally was. And that's not our fault because we weren't alive to do that. I don't know what else to say about that, James. That's a hard one. That's a hard one because that almost gets into the, you know, is nature conscious? You know, it really does for me because, you know, because I don't think nature gives 2 cents about us. I don't think it cares at all.
No.
And it's like we're trying to anthropomorphize nature and give it this consciousness so that we can feel better about this sort of subconscious debt we have to it.
I just think that most communities have a disposition towards trees and forests and woodlands specific to that community. Like Atlanta prides itself on being a tree city.
Sure.
You can't cut down a tree and
Right.
without filling out a lot of paperwork.
Right.
The Blue Ridge Mountains, the foliage in the fall is a big part of the tourism economy, right? So, you know, we all, whether we realize it or not, have some kind of economic or cultural relationship with trees.
Yeah, that's very true. And for a lot of people, it's a very shallow sort of involvement, that it's more about aesthetics, like you brought up the leaves. Well, that's all people want to see is pretty colors. You know, they're not really worried about the health of anything around them. The same thing, you could take a place like Atlanta. They're not trying to keep those trees so everyone can breathe better. You know, it's an aesthetic is all. And sadly enough, that's where people start to care about things, is when the aesthetic of something starts to get messed up. When they start to feel like, well, this city's going to be ugly if we don't have trees. This is going to not be very attractive. So it's sad that people aren't coming to it from a more holistic approach, that, you know, our lives are really going to be horrible if we don't have trees. You know, we're going to be missing a lot. We're going to have emotional issues without trees, you know?
I know there's one of my favorite books when I was a new parent was Last Child in the Woods, I think.
I haven't read that one.
Yeah, it's about exposing your kids to nature.
Yeah, it makes for a healthier person. I mean, mentally it makes for, yeah. Well, and there was a study not too long ago, I'm trying to remember who did it, where well, it was just simple that when people are outside and they're around trees, their system works better, their mind works better, all their endorphins and everything work better. But then they also found some sort of a tie between dimethyltryptamine, the activation of it in our brain when we're around trees, and even seeing wood products, you know, like makes people happy. So there's a lot to that.
Some deep down genetic heritage.
Subconscious, yeah, something that it just brings us comfort to have those things around, you know.
And again, you're saying that people treat trees as a decoration without knowing how important they really are.
Yeah, well, and you know, as time goes on, we become more and more knowledgeable about how important they are, and more of the populace becomes knowledgeable about that. But for the most part, that's right. I think it's all about the material aspect for everybody.
Now, you make your living in large part cutting trees down.
Yeah.
Not at the forest scale, but...
Yeah, well, a large part of it that's true, because so many of the efforts one can put forward to try to keep a tree healthy don't work. And most of the time, you know, when someone realizes there's an issue, it's often too late. And then there's also just the sheer here's the selfish thing with people once again. Oh my God, I need this tree out of here because it's going to destroy my life. And that's what it really, most of it comes down to, is just the fear for loss of life or property.
But there's nothing wrong with taking down a tree that's threatening your house or that has come to its end of its life.
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with taking down any tree for the most part. Like I said, I don't think we're dealing with some sort of hyper knit ecology around here. And the truth of the matter is, around most homes, during the building process, you pretty much destroy most of the trees in their habitat anyways. So I mean, you when you go to even do something as simple as like bring yourself shelter, you're destroying the woods around you, the forest around you, and you're disturbing those trees. Especially today with modern equipment, we're running all over the roots and banging against them and changing their environment, changing the water table for them, and all kinds of stuff.
Well, it's a natural consequence of human civilization.
That's exactly right.
What would you change about the way in which our communities relate to the trees in our part of the world?
Well, what I would change is a more broad understanding with the youth. Get them involved earlier on with understanding even what a tree does on the basic level for our environment. It's so kids, they make air, and that's it. That's what they get basically. They make oxygen and we breathe it. But getting them to understand that full spectrum on it is a big thing, because then they grow up to take that on and give it on, and that's a huge part of it. But on the ecological role is a big one, because they don't understand how it all works together. They really don't. Most kids don't know that all these trees' roots are tied together and they're sharing nutrients, and the wolf trees are taking up more nutrients, and then when they've had their fill, they send them back down to send to other trees. They don't realize that trees sort of have an electromagnetic pulse in the root system, like a heartbeat. They don't know what respiration and aspiration for a tree is. They don't get any of that. They don't get such simple things as like the basic consequence of removing a tree, even in your yard. If you leave a stump and you watch what happens around it, you get all these little saplings that come up next to it, and the stump slowly rises up out of the soil and rots, and you get all the insects and everything. But, even more than that, you've got all the fungus and stuff in the soil, the mycorrhizae and all this stuff that's interacting and like just making life grand for everybody. And we just, it's like behind the curtain. We don't even pay attention to it.
Well, it sounds to me like there's this like classroom sitting in your yard that you're just ignoring.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's exactly the way to look at it. That's exactly right. But most people don't know or have the education or even the will to go down that path and think about those things.
Well, we can't all be experts in everything. When you tell a school board, you need to include a curriculum that has an appreciation for X, Y, and Z, and they'll say, "Okay, what do you want to take out?"
Yeah, where are we going to squeeze that in, buddy? Yeah, and I get it. It's a big. So I guess some of that falls on the parents and the family, which we all know how hard that can be.
Sure. It's kind of nice to have a discussion about school curriculum that doesn't involve like woke politics and political dimensions.
I'm so tired of it all. Like, I don't care which side somebody's coming from. I'm tired of hearing about it, because the core meaning of everything is getting lost.
Yeah.
It's just everybody's getting lost in the weeds, and I'm so tired of hearing about it,
I would think it would be easy. It should be relatively easy to convince, say, Polk schools to include some degree of instruction from an ecologist, a forest ecologist or something, to give just a few lectures.
I mean, they could even sneak it in through history with dendrochronology. I mean, There's like lots of little ways they could put it in here and there, and I think people learn best when they have that reference for something too. You can teach kids about tree rings and how they develop in the summer and the winter, but if you show them dendrochronology and like, hey, we can look all the way back in time and see what the weather patterns and stuff were like by the rings or when we had fires, see, that excites people. They're like,
well, actually, the whole notion that dendrochronology can tell you about climate change, like,
it's amazing.
Ages ago, thousands of years ago, with fossilized trees, that for me is a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, I have a textbook on paleoclimatology, and the cover is a tree slice.
It's absolutely amazing, and the way they've managed to take trees from different parts of the world that grew at different times, and time their rings together so they get further and further back in history, or understand when volcanic eruptions happened. It's absolutely amazing. We're pretty thrifty.
A friend of mine up in Canada did a story for the Canadian Press. They recently discovered how they narrowed it down to a few years where the first Viking settlements were in Newfoundland using dendrochronology.
Oh, that's amazing.
And going back like 1,000 years.
So they could see where land was cleared or fires.
Well, they knew when this particular tree that had been turned into a post or something in the house, when that tree had been felled, so they kind of knew.
Yeah, they're doing that in some of the Hopi settlements out west now, too. They found some rafters inside the stone buildings, and they've been able to, the old pinyon pines, and it's amazing.
So in other words, it shouldn't be that hard to excite young kids about the basics of tree biology.
I agree with you. It's just like math. You put a kid in a classroom and you just give them equations that, it just shoots right through them. But if you show them what they're doing, like perhaps in a physics class, it changes their entire perception of the process. It shouldn't be that hard. And I think there are people working on it around here. I know that Henry's Nature Center is getting ready to open up here in a little while in Saluda. And the whole goal from the Land Trust is for a classroom setting to get people educated on trees.
Have you been approached to be part of that?
Yeah, of course. I've made cookies for them, which are just slices so the kids can see the different kinds of trees and, learn about the dendrochronology and stuff like that. Yeah.
I'll look forward to that and pay attention. I don't know. I know they've been working on the Henry's Nature Center for quite a while.
Yeah, but we've sadly enough, in order to make a little progress, you've got to break a few eggs. So I've been out there cutting down quite a few trees for them.
Once again, there's nothing wrong with taking down a tree, right? And your yard is full of dead trees.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm actually going to make use of all these. I've got a mobile sawmill coming in a few weeks. We're going to turn all these into a house. It's going to be an experiment. We'll see how it goes. I'm not sure how legal it is, but I don't really care either.
I'll think about whether I want to edit that out.
Yeah, no, leave it in. That's fine. I don't care.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at where we can go in the future. There are a lot of pressures dealing with climate change. People want to preserve forests because they are big carbon sucks, right? And there are pressures from those who would cut down a lot of trees to turn them into pellets as biomass, ostensibly a carbon neutral source of energy.
That is so bizarre to me. That is such a bizarre thing. The wood pellet thing is so bizarre. Did you know my friend Scott Q, he works for the Dogwood Alliance.
Okay.
He caught a timber company down in Louisiana. They had found a stand of old growth cypress. We're talking 2,000-3,000 year old trees.
There can't be that many of those left in the world.
No, and they were cutting them down and turning them into pellets. But he busted them and they stopped. And it was like one of those great, hurrah hippie moments.
I understand that it's primarily European consumers, right? They're shipping pelletized trees from North Carolina and elsewhere.
It makes no sense. To me, it's like shipping oil across the ocean. It makes no sense. But I mean, agendas.
Yeah.
Big business agendas.
And again, people are largely ignorant of this sort of thing.
Well, and most people just don't care. We want to look pretty and we want to stay warm and we want to stay full. And that's the basis for most human life.
Sure.
And most people don't really, once again, give 2 cents about what happens when they're gone, and it's created a pretty sad situation.
Well, what do you worry about the most?
The stuff we don't know, the stuff we don't know that we should know, the stuff we can't even guess might happen. As far as the trees are concerned, what I worry about most is the source is actually international trade is what I worry about the most, because this is where we get all these invasive species, we get all these invasive insects and all these problems from sharing environments, basically. Not that I don't think we should be doing international trade. It's just
we should be more careful.
But it'd be when you think about the amount of international trade that's going on, it's impossible to check it all. It's impossible to stop it from happening. Is what I'm saying.
In the past we've lost just about all of our chestnuts, right, in this country,
because some people in New York wanted to have a Siberian chestnut planted in their botanical garden. It came from one tree, and that's it. And there are still a few chestnuts around growing in the woods, and I won't tell anybody where they're at.
Maybe you can show me one day.
I'll show you where one is.
Okay.
It's easy to get to.
Okay.
But yeah, and it's not huge either, which excited me because it wasn't like this. They're not like these grand old trees. They're like smaller, but they're coming back. And that excites me from a genetic perspective too, because it's like somewhere, like when the chestnut was getting attacked, it started maybe changing its genetics right before it dropped its last chestnuts, and from that somewhere hidden in a crack between rocks or something, a new form is coming out. So it's pretty neat.
And more recently, we have woody adelgids.
Oh, that's
picking up the
bad.
hemlocks.
You got ambrosia beetle. We now have the granular ambrosia beetle. It's killing everybody's fig trees. Really the list goes on, man. And even the Japanese killer hornets, we're finding those in trees left and right and having to shut down jobs because what do you do? Like nobody wants to play with those.
No.
But yeah, there's that. And then, the other thing that I really worry about that never, ever really gets talked about is what's happening to the water. All these chemicals that we're producing and that are leaching out through the systems, all these medicines, all this stuff that the water table can't filter out. And knowing that trees and the roots are giant hormone factories for the most part. And here we are introducing all these wild chemicals into the environment that are known to alter hormones. So that's one thing that I'm really worried about.
Oh, this is getting a little darker than I thought.
Well, I mean,
I asked, but
yeah. No, well, the positive note is that some people seem to be getting smarter, and we will probably always have problem solvers that are going to start figuring this stuff out, and that excites me.
How do you stay on top of the latest understandings and the latest developments in our understanding of forest ecology?
Yeah, the internet's the best way to do it. The internet and going to bookstores and finding books, the stuff that people used to do that they don't do anymore. But I've kind of honestly, I've fallen off, after a while. I guess you feel like you're talking to a brick wall after a while. Like, what's the point of gathering or amassing all this knowledge about the things that are happening if nobody really wants to listen to it anyways? And it's actually a pretty dark and, disturbing subject when you look at what's really happening to our trees and what's going on. So
there was a very well-regarded book came out a few years ago and won a Pulitzer Prize, The Overstory.
Yeah, I had lots of people tell me about that one, but
Yeah.
I didn't read it once again.
It's pretty dark. So
yeah,
maybe,
yeah, I know.
but it mentioned a lot of the things that you're talking about, the interconnected ecosystems of tree stands and the disappearing chestnut, and people who would sit in trees to prevent them from being cut down.
Yeah,
clear cuts.
Pretty powerful stuff, man.
Yeah.
And
I just think it's interesting that you pay attention to this aspect of your field, of your profession. Most people see you as a guy who comes to their house and cuts down a tree
that's
and
it.
hauls it away.
Yeah, you got it. But education behind that makes a big difference. And there are plenty of times where I won't do something.
I was just going to ask you that. People ask you to do something, you say,
there's no reason to do that. This tree is perfectly healthy and it's fine. You're not in danger. Nothing is in danger. I've had people ask me to cut down their trees because they're tired of cleaning up the leaves. And I know that they're going to call somebody and somebody's going to do it, but it's not going to be me. I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. And hopefully in telling them no, it'll change them a little bit and make them rethink their decision. It usually doesn't, but
maybe once in a while.
Maybe once in a while. Yeah. And I do so much of this that I don't focus on it after hours and education wise like I used to. I'd rather go inside and read Guns, Germs, and Still or the Tao of Physics or something, just because it's different.
I have a hard time imagining that too many of your competitors have a similar habit.
I mean, I think. Well, I don't like to call competitor is a word I don't like to use because I'm really not competing with anyone.
Well, I mean, and this podcast isn't about giving you a platform to sell your business.
Well, I was going to get into that, but I'm not trying to compete, and it makes me laugh because a lot of these guys are. I mean, these guys are super competitive about this stuff, and they have rivalries, and and it's all about money, and it just kind of makes me laugh.
Well, one thing I noticed, I've been here for 18 years, and when I moved here, I didn't see a lot of tree services being advertised. Now you see billboards, and they're sponsoring NPR programs.
It's a big business, man. Yeah, and it kind of makes me sick a little bit. Like I don't even have shirts or signs or business cards. I refuse to do it.
But you're busy, right?
Oh, I'm super busy. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. There is a huge demand for your services.
Yeah.
and those of your competitors. We can call them that. Why do you think? I mean, what is the
population?
reason?
the population has increased. More and more homes have been built. There's more money coming into the area. So aesthetics are a big part. And then people are also, we had a pretty big housing boom about, what was that, before 2008?
Yeah.
Okay, so a lot of the problems that were created with the trees in people's yards from that housing boom are now starting to show up. Another thing, you remember that massive ice storm we had about 12, 10,
The
12?
one that turned all the trees into matchsticks?
Oh yeah. So problems are starting to arise from all that happening. So really, one of the reasons that everybody can stay so busy is because all the problems that were kind of hidden in the weeds are starting to show up now, especially as people expand further and further into the woods and build more and more houses and stuff.
I was curious as to whether or not just the natural lifespan of the trees means we're coming up on like a point at which they're all dying.
Yeah, well, and that's debatable too, because you have to remember when the colonials got here, they were messing with 8 oak trees that were 9-10 feet wide, that had drip canopies 200 feet wide. So, I mean, if we look around, we don't see anything like that, do we? But these trees are in horrible health.
But like you said earlier, we're on our second or third cut kind of thing. Is it time, like just the trees in our yard, a lot of them were obviously planted about the time our house was built 120 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's
and I think that could be said simply off the basis that these things aren't, like, especially yard trees, aren't getting the nutrients they need. Everybody's blowing their leaves away every year and all that, so they don't really, they're just not getting what they need to live a long life. That's just like the question, how long could a human live if we really did everything perfect? It's the same thing. So we probably are coming up on that. I'm sure there's a certain set life cycle of a tree that's not in good environment, especially depending on the species. You see some trees that'll come up in the cracks in a sidewalk and, rip the world apart just to be there. So,
well, my wife and I were out hiking the other day to Melrose Falls, and there's this tree that's sitting right on top of a monster boulder. And it doesn't look like there's any soil at all.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it's feeding from way out past that thing, and I'm sure the soil used to be around that or something so that it could stick there. Another thing that I think we're dealing with that doesn't get talked about is that huge drought we had. You remember, I guess it's been about 8 years back now, we had a 7-year-long drought.
Well, I remember that well because a well on our property went dry.
So what we're finding more often than not when we cut down mature trees, tap roots are gone and they're hollowing out. So it's been, like, I deduce basically that if the tap root dies because it can't get water, it's going to start to rot, and then it's going to rot up through the center of the tree. So I think the reason there's such a large demand is because we're dealing with a lot of different reasons coinciding at this time.
But if you had to say the number one reason, which is just more people wanting to clear more.
Yeah, and the more people you have, the more they clear, the more they notice too. And the funny thing is, not to bring up COVID, but that was the busiest I ever was.
People were home.
They were at home, and they were in their yards, and they were looking around. And it's amazing what a difference that'll make when you're home enough to pay attention.
Well, that's kind of a good sign, isn't it?
I thought it was great. I mean, not because I was making a lot of money, but like it was like, okay, people are paying attention. And the funny thing about that is the next winter, I didn't get as many emergency calls for, when there's an ice storm coming, everybody freaks out and they want you to come over and cut their tree that they've been neglecting. So come the next winter, I didn't get as many of those calls because people were home paying attention to what was going on. Funny stuff.
Well, that's a really interesting sort of side effect that I hadn't thought about. Certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, we're learning a lot about humans because of COVID that had nothing to do with the disease itself.
Yeah, I think it'd probably be best to look at it like it were an experiment. And I know some people want to do that from a conspiracy level. What I look at everything like it's an experiment, like life in general, whatever we're doing is, I think if it were looked at a little more like that, people could gain a little more insight and knowledge from what went on, just like everything, instead of taking everything so seriously.
Well, it sounds like you're not going to be short of any work for the next little while.
No.
Where do you find yourself working these days? I mean, you're based in Saluda, but how far afield do you go?
If I have a rule, if it's 20 minutes from the house, I'm not going. That's pretty much it. So
that's
20
pretty
minutes.
Sweet.
Well, and I've been doing this 22 years, and knowing the community helps, but it took a long time to be able to get to that point. But I'll drive every now and then. I'll drive to Asheville for somebody I really like, or down towards Greenville for somebody I really like. And I do have clients that have multiple homes. So, but those are rare occasions. I try to keep it within 20 minutes, and I feel like that's what everybody should do. It's always weird to be driving to Asheville to work and see somebody from Asheville driving to Saluda to work.
Yeah.
It's always perplexed me. But
Well, that's the disaster that is commuting.
yeah, and that's it. That's a big part of why I've made this choice too, because who wants to be on I-26 with 16,000 pounds of equipment behind him and a dump truck with a chipper? And I mean, can you imagine going through some of that stuff like that? I just don't want to do it, and I'm not going to. And if I go the back ways, it takes me an hour and a half to get any. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
And if I don't have work that day, and that's the only work I had, I'd probably just stay home and not go.
All right. Well, hey, I think we've covered just about everything I can think of.
Okay.
I mean, I've tried to pretend that I know a little bit about this subject.
No, you do.
But,
you know more than the average.
But is there anything we haven't covered? Any other closing thoughts on what you wish your customers or just the community at large would?
So I'll tell you what hurts my heart about all this is the waste, just the sheer amount of waste. And the amount of beautiful timber that gets turned into firewood or thrown into the landfill. I mean, it is sickening. It's just sickening, man. When all these things, here we are getting spruce 2x4s from Czechoslovakia. Like, why are we doing that when look, right there, Why do I need it shipped from across the ocean when I've got it in my backyard?
I'll take a picture and link to it in the show notes.
Yeah, it amazes me. And, also, wood chips. It's a huge, this is great biomass. You want to talk about wood pellets?
Yeah.
I don't get it. I just don't get it, James. And go down to the Polk County landfill and look at the wood debris section there. It's a mountain. And they turn it into yard mulch, and they have the hardest time getting rid of it. I mean, it just... When that's there and that exists in almost every county, why are we cutting fresh forests for wood pellets? And, it's bizarre. There needs to be a better system, man. There really does.
Well, I guess it's just a function that capitalism has decided that's the most efficient way of doing things.
But it's not. It's not. There's no way that, maybe I'm approaching it from a holistic perspective, but I don't even see where financially that could be the best way to do it when you've got people literally throwing timber away and paying somebody to take it. How? I don't know.
I guess what you need is some sort of oversight group saying, "Hey, we'll manage the waste and the demand, and we'll put the people together so that we aren't wasting."
I think in order for it to work, it'd have to happen on a national level,
or at least a regional level, right?
Yeah, right. So, and that's something that I've always wanted to do, but that it takes a lot of people getting along to make that work. And you want to talk about a bunch of tree guys getting along? It's not an easy thing because they're all.
You guys are all pretty much individual.
Yeah, we like to be our own boss. But yeah, it needs to happen though. I mean, not just. Well, you could say for the sake of our planet, but just for the sake of logic. I mean, it drives me nuts. It's so inefficient, man. It drives me nuts. But it would also be, after a while, it would provide jobs for people.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seems like it would make things easier in the long run.
Probably would mean the government would have to create a new agency of some kind.
And I don't know that that's what we need.
Well, that's certainly not a popular thing in some parts.
No. Well, they have a track record of not being very good at what they do.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we've used enough of your time.
Yeah, man.
So thanks so much. And we'll stay in touch, obviously, because I'll probably have something to do in my yard.
Okay. Yeah, anytime, man. Anytime. All right.
And that's not such a bad way to kick off leaf season, is it? As always, if you've got any suggestions for future episodes, send an email to jamesh@polklore.com. Since I began this podcast kind of rudely with some chainsaw noises, I'll leave you now with a minute of found sound from the forest. Thanks for listening.